Hi, my name is Joe Heimlich. I'm Professor Emeritus with The Ohio State University and Executive Director of the Center for Research and Evaluation at COSI, a large science center in Columbus. If you had been in one of my classes, you likely would have heard me say this: write down the environmental issues that most interest you. The class would then be divided into shared interests, and the groups were then tasked with identifying that issue in a particular neighborhood in the city, decided what they wanted to know about the issue in that neighborhood, and then coming up with something that would address the issue in that particular neighborhood. Sometimes they came up with a research study. Other times it would be a project involving residents of the neighborhood. Sometimes they'd identify an organization they could work with on developing a plan for the community or a community group that they could help achieve a goal. This is called problem-based learning. And today I'd like to briefly share with you some of the basic principles of PBL, or problem-based learning, and how it relates to environmental education. I also would like to share some of the rewards and challenges in doing PBL. Problem-based learning requires learners to work together in groups in order to solve challenging, complex, and authentic problems directly related to the content desired to be imparted. PBL is related to experiential learning in that it is based in doing something meaningful. Problem-based learning also intersects with both the constructivist and the constructionism philosophies of learning. All of these approaches value the belief that learning happens best when it is grounded in a real, meaningful, challenging, social experience. There are 7 basic steps in PBL. 1. A problem-based learning opportunity begins with an introduction to set the stage for the project. In environmental ed, this is often engaging the learners in thinking about a particular environmental issue and the context in which the issue is being considered. 2. Learners are given a task. These challenging, problematic, but doable challenges are usually designed by the educator and presented in a series of questions. In my graduate classes, I had the learners engage in defining their own problems to address, knowing that they likely had higher skills than would younger learners with fewer experiences. 3. The educator then provides the necessary resources, or access to resources, to appropriately address the problem. For EE, some key resources include access to the physical environment, access to information about the state of the environment, specifically tied to the location under study, and tools for gathering necessary information. 4. As learners engage with the problem, the role of the educator is to provide both guidance and scaffolding, or building on prior experience. I believe the complexity of environmental issues requires the educator to often play the devil's advocate and appropriately push back on the groups of learners, challenging them with alternative ideas or introducing ideas they may be overlooking in order to solve a problem. I am cautious in my language with the learners and talk about addressing, not solving a problem. When the language begins to be about solutions rather than approaches, I often would throw in additional considerations to help the group understand that a solution from one perspective may increase the negative impacts of the issue from a different perspective. 5. Problem-based learning is best implemented using groups to foster collaborative and cooperative learning. I use the group size recommendations from communications theory, which suggests groups of 5 whenever possible, with a maximum of 7, is right for this type of work. 5 is the number at which consensus requires negotiation, which reflects good critical thinking, but the group can remain task-focused and goal-oriented. 6. And the final step, not unlike in experiential education, is reflection. PBL is most effective when reflection is interwoven throughout the process, with critical consideration given over data, data sources, biases, alternative explanations, interdisciplinary perspective, histories, economics, and all the other things that make EE so wonderful and challenging. PBL, especially around environmental issues, usually is done over time. That makes it hard to delve deeply into an environmental issue in a specific context and come up with a way of addressing change in the short term. But it is possible to do a very simplistic activity almost as a role-player simulation game. In that case, the learning is constrained by the amount of information the learners bring into the learning, and certainly is limited in the different options they could explore before making a decision as to their preferred option. Finally, I'd like to just mention a word about assessment. PBL can be challenging to grade, especially since learning may not be reflected in the approach presented. Those who study PBL suggest a portfolio or a rubric approach to the process as preferred tools for assessment. Every community has its own environmental issues, and there's never one solution that will work for everyone. PBL provides educators with a way of deeply engaging learners in meaningful understanding of complex environmental issues. I'd like you to think about and answer this question for the module. How would I structure a problem-based learning project in my community? I look forward to sharing with you my ideas and to learning about yours. Thanks for listening.